So I've been getting literally hundreds of questions a day from my Malaysian viewers and subscribers about how the US government's dealing with this crisis compared to Malaysia. Are they going to implement an MCO? Is there going to be a lockdown? Are they going to make things stricter? Today I'm going to answer those questions. Hey everybody, welcome to another video and welcome to Washington. I'm currently in my tree house, which I built in a fallen tree over a creek. It's very near to my yoga hut, my Ramadan hut, the hut that I built in my Ramadan video. In my next video, I'm going to show you guys how I made this thing, as well as a project that I've been working on in the forest out here. But today I was going to answer you guys' questions. This is part 2 of my question and answer video about coronavirus in the US and Malaysia and how do they compare. So let's get to it. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to my channel by clicking the link below. It only takes a second and it helps me out a lot. Go ahead and click it. I'll wait for you. So the first question, which doesn't have to do with coronavirus, are there a lot of mosquitoes here by my Ramadan hut in the forest? Yes, there are, but I've been using sprays, and also I have these candles now, which make it a little easier. They haven't been biting me since I've been up here in my tree fort. So there's been a lot of bad news about China recently, which is a shame because I really love China. I lived there for a year. I filmed a lot of YouTube videos in China. So to make this video more interesting, so you're not just watching me read questions off my phone, I'm going to show you guys some of my favorite places in China, some of the clips that I filmed that are on YouTube, so I hope you guys enjoy. So first question. So Safura has asked, curious about the COVID-19 situation in the US, especially in New York. Why the number of cases and deaths increased so fast? Wasn't there any drastic action taken from government? So the most obvious reason for it increasing so fast in New York is that New York City is the most populated city in the United States. There's a lot of people working and living in confined areas. Most of the US is rural in that it's mostly farmland and forests and unoccupied government land. There's a lot of small towns, and the virus isn't going to spread as quickly in these areas since people are living farther apart. Just like in American movies and TV shows, they live in small towns, they have their own house, they have a yard, so there's this distance between people. Whereas in New York, it's just like the movies. You have all these huge buildings, people are going to work and going home, and they're riding the metros, and they're working in office buildings. So the population density in New York is much higher than the rest of the US. Another reason is New York is famous for tourism and culture and business. So there's a lot of international and domestic travelers coming in and out of New York to do business, to see a show, to see the sights. Also, there's a lot of debate about it, but people are saying that the federal government didn't act swiftly enough, that they're withholding medical supplies. Some people were saying it was the federal government's fault. Some were saying it's the New York government's fault. I'd say the main reasons would be the population density of New York City, as well as the amount of travelers coming in and out of New York. Ray T asks, how much is 3-ply surgical mask selling now in the US? Malaysia government has set the ceiling price at 1 ringgit 50. So when I was in Malaysia, the Malaysian government hadn't set the ceiling price to 1 ringgit 50 yet. The only mask that I actually found in KL cost me 6 ringgit in Times Square Mall, which is pretty expensive. Here in the US, I haven't actually seen those masks for sale. Most people that I see are making masks that they've made at home. They're using bandanas. They're using dust masks that you use for construction. And those are actually the only ones that I've seen at the store, is the dust masks. But it's not the actual 3-ply surgical mask that you're supposed to be wearing, or the N95 mask. Also, I did a Google search here in the US to see if I could find some masks online that I could buy, but there were 0 search results, and a small disclaimer from Google saying that they've removed any ads that have been trying to increase the price of their masks. So similar to Malaysia, they are trying to control the price of masks so that people aren't charging too much money, but I haven't seen any selling in the store, and nobody that I've talked to has been able to buy them. This question isn't coronavirus related, but Yen's World asks, how do you find Malaysia and what do you find interesting here? So if you've seen my videos of me stuck in Kuala Lumpur, you'd know that I haven't really got the full Malaysian experience. I arrived the day before the MCO began, so most of the time I was stuck in the hotel. The only times that I actually went out were my first night before the MCO began. Also, every couple days I'd go walk around Bukit Bintang and try and find some food. I went to KLCC to find food. I went to Pavilion. I went to Times Square. So I haven't really got to experience a lot of what Malaysia has to offer. I haven't been able to experience the food so much because most everything was closed when I was there. I haven't been able to experience the culture. I haven't been able to see the sights. So I'd say that my favorite thing so far about Malaysia is the people. So everybody that I talked to in Malaysia, including the staff working at the shops, the people that I met on the streets, the police officers that stopped me while I was walking around during lockdown, the security guards at the malls, everybody that I talked to was really nice, really polite, really helpful. Also, all of my subscribers and viewers were really helpful to me while I was in Malaysia, and they've also been really supportive of me since I've been back here in the US, and they all seem to be generally kind and concerning about my health and about Americans' health since it's so bad here compared to Malaysia. So definitely my favorite thing about Malaysia that I've experienced so far is the people. So one of my subscribers and friends from Malaysia, Joyce, asked me, "Hi Cody, stay safe there. How's the situation there in the US?" I'd say that the situation in the US is pretty bad, but also maybe not as bad as it seems. At the moment, there's over 1.1 million confirmed coronavirus cases in the US. Only about 12% have recovered so far, and there's about 65,000 deaths. So that's pretty terrible. But most of these cases and deaths are concentrated in some of the bigger, more populated areas like New York City, a lot of the bigger cities in the East Coast. So that's the bad news. The good news is that the US is a really big place. A lot of the US is very rural. It's a lot of farmland, a lot of forests, things like that. So a lot of people are living life normally and it doesn't affect them that much. So the area that I'm staying now actually only has 4 confirmed coronavirus cases. Most of the stores are closed down, but when you go to the grocery store, people are being cautious. Not everybody's wearing masks, not everybody's socially distancing. So the good news is life isn't exactly normal here in the US for the most part, but a lot of places aren't on lockdown. People are still enjoying their lives. And a lot of people that are living in the rural areas like where I live are socially distancing and they're not having any issues. MUHD, Mood Jeffrey, I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. I just wonder why they demonstrate during this time in US. I touched on this subject in another question, but freedom and liberty are one of the most important things to Americans. A lot of Americans don't like the government being in their business. They like to live their own life on their own terms. They don't like being told to stay home. They don't like being told they can't go to work. So since a lot of the US is rural and coronavirus isn't really affecting those areas so much since there's not a lot of cases, they feel they shouldn't be locked down, that they should be returning to life as normal, that they should get the economy going. A lot of people are upset because they're being told to stay at home. They're told that they can't go to work, but there's not any coronavirus cases in their town. So they think it's a bit silly, that it's ruining the economy, that there's not really a point to it since there aren't any coronavirus cases around them, and they do have a bit of a point in those rural areas. Jafar Hassan has asked, "I always wanted to visit Oregon. How is the current situation over there?" So in Oregon, there's currently 2,510 cases of coronavirus and 103 deaths. Compared to a lot of hot spots like New York and a lot of the eastern states and Washington, Oregon's doing pretty well. There's a lot of stores closed. There's a lot of people staying home from work. There are a lot of rules. There's a stay-at-home order, but people aren't always following it. As you can see in my video of people just hanging out in the park in downtown Portland and the police not doing anything about it. But for the most part, life in Oregon is still pretty good. So Anwar Razlan asks, does Portland also do the snitches get rewarded enforcement like in Los Angeles? In Los Angeles, California, the mayor said that if you see any businesses open that shouldn't be, you should report it to the authorities, and if you do, you'll get rewarded. They never said what the reward would be, if there'd be a monetary reward or anything. Nothing like that's happened in Portland as far as I know. I saw a lot of businesses in Portland, Oregon that were open that were non-essential businesses. They should have been closed, but nobody was doing anything about it. Nobody really cared. So no snitches get rewarded in Portland as far as I know. Mood Nur Ramadan asked, where do you live and how many cases there? When I got back from Malaysia, I was staying in a suburb of Portland, Oregon for 2 weeks for my quarantine, and there's 200 cases in that county. Then I was staying in another city in Oregon for a while, and there's over 300 cases in that area. But the place that I'm staying now, there's only 4 cases, which is pretty good. I feel pretty safe. Is it expensive for healthcare in the US, especially for those who want to get tested? So the healthcare in the US is very expensive. It's one of the most expensive places for healthcare in the world. So that's why there's a lot of healthcare tourism in Southeast Asia, places like Malaysia and Thailand, where Americans and Europeans go to get surgeries or they retire there for the healthcare. From what I've heard, here in the US, you have to pay to get tested for coronavirus. Most Americans have health insurance, and I've heard that the health insurance companies are required to pay for that, but sometimes there's a small fee that you have to pay associated with that. I'm not sure what it's like for people who don't have insurance. I'm sure they have to pay, but some of my friends here in the US have had to pay for coronavirus testing even though they have insurance. So it's not free like it is in Malaysia. So Nurul Basar asks, just wondering how the local healthcare agencies are doing. So towards the end of my 2-week quarantine, I visited a medical center in Portland, Oregon for a checkup not related to coronavirus. The medical center was very serious about coronavirus. They stopped you when you came in the door, they took your temperature, they asked you not to touch anything, they had sanitizer available, they had masks available, and it was all done very professionally. So there are coronavirus cases in my area, but there's not as many as like some of the places like New York, places on the East Coast where they're just totally swamped with coronavirus cases, where they're having trouble keeping up, where they're running out of medical supplies. So they are busy here where I'm living, but it's not quite as hectic as it is over in those areas. So my friend and subscriber Sarah Schofield asked me 2 questions, but the second question is about the President of the United States, and I don't answer those questions. But the first question is there going to be a tighter or even total lockdown imposed soon, since the infected rate is getting higher every day? So the rates were increasing quite a bit for a while, but now they're leveling off. They're not decreasing yet, but they are kind of leveling off a bit. I highly doubt that there would ever be a total lockdown in the US. It would never work. Nobody would stay home. A lot of people would resist it. A lot of people are resisting the partial lockdowns that are happening here in the US. They're protesting them. They're already talking about opening the government back up for the economy. Every state in the US manages itself and has its own rules. Some states are resisting the federal government's orders and doing their own thing. So the US is so huge, there's not enough police, there's not enough military. It would be nearly impossible to enforce a lockdown, a total lockdown. Perhaps some of the hardest hit areas with the highest population densities like New York, maybe it'd be possible, but the entire US on total lockdown, that's never going to happen. So Australian Francis asks, hey Cody, how different are the uptake of the people from different states? I've watched other YouTubers from different states and it seems different from where you are. And that's totally true. So the federal government for the US has its own rules and regulations, but each state has their own rules and regulations as well. So it's going to change from state to state. Of course, New York and New York City are going to have some of the tightest regulations. Some of the more rural areas are going to have the least amount of regulations. The state of South Dakota, for instance, it's more of a rural state. It doesn't have a huge population. There's not a lot of big cities. The governor of the state actually went against the federal government's order recently and started opening things back up on her own. Oregon, where I'm from, there is a stay-at-home order, and there is a fine if you get caught, if you're not going to the grocery store or hospital or something. But nobody's really following it. The police aren't really doing anything about it. Although a lot of people aren't getting fined in Oregon, I have heard of people getting fined on federal land, which is interesting. So I Am Me asked, what's your relationship status? Just wanted to know, since you do travel vlog as a career, how does it affect your relationship? So I am single, so it doesn't really affect my relationship at all. So travel vlogging isn't actually my career, it's just a hobby of mine. It's something that I'm passionate about, something that I love to do, something that keeps me productive while I'm traveling. I don't actually make a lot of money from travel vlogging. I'd hope to someday. My dream is to become a travel vlogger. To become a successful travel vlogger, I'd have to have a lot more subscribers and a lot more views. And you don't actually get paid for views on YouTube, you only get paid when people watch the ads or they click on the ads. So it doesn't matter how many subscribers you have, how many viewers you have. It just depends on how many people watch the ads and click on the ads. So one of my good friends and subscribers, Yvonne Lee, asked me, what's your favorite Malaysian food? And that's a difficult question to answer because I haven't actually had any Malaysian food. So I was in Kuala Lumpur for about a week and a half, but as during the MCO, most of the shops were closed, most of the restaurants were closed. To save money, I was mostly going to the supermarket to buy my own food and make my own meals in my hotel. The only restaurant that I actually got food from in Kuala Lumpur was an Indian restaurant, and I was getting things like chana masala and dal and naan, just your typical Indian foods, but not actually Malaysian food. I will be back to Malaysia though. Once this crisis is over and all the shops are open and the restaurants are open, I'll be back and I'll be trying all the Malaysian food that I can, and then I'll let you know. I'm not going to pronounce this right, Fitin, F-T-I-N. Their question is, how you guys in the US don't have lockdown, what is the best alternative then? We do actually have lockdown in a lot of states, but people aren't always following them. So the best alternative I would say would be social distancing. just being mindful of everyone around you, not getting too close to people, being careful what you touch, only going out for the essentials, staying away from big crowds. That would probably be the best alternative if there is no lockdown. Hazik Razali asked me, is it true that some hospitals doesn't have enough PPE for doctors and nurses over there? So I did go to a medical center in Oregon, and they did have enough medical equipment. The doctors and nurses were wearing masks, they were wearing gloves, they were giving out free masks to people in the waiting room. So where I'm at, there's no shortage of supply. I'm assuming they're talking about places like New York City, places that you see on the news all the time where they're running out of medical supplies. Those places, yes, I've heard it's true, but of course I haven't seen them for myself. I've only seen it on the news. So Vic Tam has asked, I heard someone in the US comments that they confused and do not have a clear definitive guideline to prevent the pandemic due to clash of information, misinformation between central government, state government, counties, and even city municipal. Ends up everybody like a chicken running around with their head chopped off. Is that true? I'd say for the most part people are smart and they know the rules that they should be following. They know that they should only be going out for essentials, they should be socially distancing, they should be staying away from large groups, but they're not always following that. The confusing part though is that different states do have different rules and different laws, and even laws and rules within the state are different depending on the city and the population density and the amount of cases that they have. So interstate travel in the US is still open. You may travel from one state to the next and not know the rules because it could be completely different from yours. So that's where it gets confusing. So RF Hamidi had a question. Is U.S. police departments, military personnel, and etc. will aid your state's Oregon movement order, such as implement roadblocks, finding traces of clusters, etc.? The answer, for the most part, probably not. There is a partial lockdown in Oregon, similar to the MCO in Malaysia, but people aren't really following it and the police aren't really enforcing it. Some places in Oregon have been closed off with police tape and notices saying that you're not supposed to be gathering in these places. Maybe some of the police or security often patrol them and then they warn people and tell them that they need to go home, but they aren't giving out a lot of fines. They aren't really arresting people. They haven't done anything drastic like put up roadblocks like they have in Malaysia. So Nayli asked me, how have you been doing lately and how does it feel different to be back in the US? So I am doing very well, thank you. I was in quarantine for 2 weeks, self-quarantine, and that was pretty boring. After that, I was able to go see my family. It was nice to see my family after being away from them for so long because I was traveling for 6 or 7 months, but I was very busy helping them move. They were selling their house in Oregon, and we recently moved to our new place. If you'd seen my last video, my Ramadan video, where I built this hut that I'm sitting in, you know that I've been here relaxing in the forest, listening to the birds, meditating, doing yoga, also fasting for Ramadan. So I'm doing very well, so thank you for asking, Nayli. So Isabel asks, what's the real situation in your local area? Are most people aware and taking precautions like wearing masks, keeping social distance, and sanitizing their hands? So it's definitely not as strict as Malaysia here. There are a lot of people still working. There are a lot of people going out and hanging out in parks and things like that, like you saw in my other video. But for the most part, I do see a lot of people trying. When I go to the grocery store, for instance, maybe a third of the people, a quarter of the people are wearing masks. Not the actual masks that you're supposed to be wearing. A lot of them have bandanas on their face. They are kind of trying to keep their distance. A lot of people do forget because they're just not used to this kind of thing. Some stores do have hand sanitizer. A lot of them have these plexiglass screens in front of the registers to protect the employees. They're only allowing a certain amount of people in the store at a time. So it's definitely not as strict as Malaysia here where I'm at in my local area, but a lot of people are making an effort and it is nice to see. So Token Corner asked, maybe you can share your experience and view on what good thing you have to see and learn from your exploration that can be shared with your fellow Americans during this pandemic. So I'm assuming you're talking about the things that I saw in Malaysia, the things that I saw in different airports when I was traveling back to the US. I did love how they were handling it in Malaysia. I loved how strict it was. It was very boring sitting in a hotel room all day, but they were doing a lot of work. But they were doing a lot of work to prevent the virus, and everybody was staying home. So everybody in Malaysia should be proud for doing that. It'd be nice to have something similar in the US, but I don't think that that's possible because a lot of people aren't going to follow the rules, unfortunately, here in the US. I think the main thing that I saw in Malaysia that could be easily implemented here in the US would just be for everybody to actually follow the rules and practice social distancing, to wear masks, not to protect themselves, but to protect others, and also use hand sanitizer often, wash their hands often, just those little common sense, everyday little things that people often overlook here in the US, but it's become really common in Malaysia. So just little simple things like that that people can do every day. So Stam Raj asked me, did I experience any culture shock in Malaysia compared to the US? And the answer is no. I was in Bukit Bintang the entire time, and it's a pretty developed, westernized area. I lived in China for a year, and I think that got a lot of the culture shock as far as Asia goes out of my system. And before I came to Kuala Lumpur, I was staying in India for almost 4 months. So there was a bit of culture shock in India. There's definitely some culture shock in China when I lived there, when I first moved there. So I'm pretty used to Asia by now. So when I got to Kuala Lumpur, I didn't really experience any culture shock because it's just so modern compared to a lot of Southeast Asian countries. So my good friend and subscriber Rose Odell asked me, what hobby do you start during the pandemic to enjoy yourself, or a new project? So one thing I was doing a lot, especially in quarantine, was yoga. That's kind of a hobby that I started in India, and I've been trying to continue here in the US. Also, I play piano and guitar, but I was traveling for several months in Asia and I didn't have access to a piano or a guitar, so I wasn't able to practice. So I've been practicing since I've been home. Another thing that I've been working on is YouTube videos, of course. Making YouTube videos is a passion of mine. It's one of my main hobbies. Normally I make travel videos where I'm walking around Asia, but since I've been here, I've been stuck at home and I've been having to get creative and figure out new ways to make videos. Like this video, for instance, I've never done a question and answer video before. I've never just sat in front of the camera and made a video like I'm doing now. So this is all new to me. I've been experimenting around and trying new things, but some of my videos have been pretty popular, especially with Malaysians. What's your favorite food in US and Malaysia? As I said before, I didn't really get to try any Malaysian food, but I hope to next time I return to Malaysia after this crisis is over. I wouldn't say that I have a favorite food in the US because I do like a lot of variety, and I do like a lot of ethnic food and foreign food. But every time that I return to the US from Asia, there is one food that I eat very often when I first return, and that is cheese toasties or grilled cheese sandwiches. When I'm traveling in Asia, there's a lot of good breads and pastries that I find, but nothing compared to the sandwich breads that I'm used to here in the US. Also, cheese isn't really a huge part of Asian diets in general, so you don't find a lot of cheese. The cheeses that you do find are usually imported, and they're very expensive. Of course, in India you have paneer, but paneer is different than the cheeses that we have in the US. So every time I return to the US from Asia, I'm usually eating cheese toasties non-stop for the first week or two, and I gain a lot of weight, and then I often have to exercise a lot to lose that weight again. Next question, what thing do you really want to do after this pandemic ends? That's a very easy question. I want to travel and I want to make videos. I definitely want to return to Malaysia where I can have a proper Malaysian experience rather than just sitting in a hotel room like I was last time. I also want to do some trekking in Nepal. Last time I was in Nepal, I did the Everest Base Camp trek, which I have many videos of you can check out. But I'd like to try out another trek when I'm there next time. I've been to Thailand before and I'd love to return, but there's other countries I haven't been to yet, like Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Indonesia, places that I've been wanting to visit. Are you a dog person or a cat person? Both. I'm an animal person. I love all animals. I'm not too keen on snakes. I'm not too keen on bugs, but they don't really bother me too much. But I definitely love all animals. So I'm really going to mispronounce this name. Sayarul Hafizan asks, do you own a cat or dog? My family has 3 cats, Tiki, Kiki, and Wolfie, and they're all amazing. So that's it, everybody, for part 2 of my question and answer video. If you haven't checked out part 1, please do so. Also stay tuned for my next video where I show you guys how I made this tree fort, as well as a project that I'm working on in the woods over here, and an update on my Ramadan and my fasting. So I hope you guys enjoy it, and I'll see you guys next time.